Well, we are continuing with the topic of the nature of the enemy. When we discuss the nature of the enemy, a third term that I'd like to look at is what's called the tempter. The tempter, again, is a general term referring to God's enemy, but underneath that, we can learn various ways in which he does tempt us. Let's go to Matthew chapter 4, verse 3. In a previous teaching, we looked at Matthew 4:4, where the devil, when he came to Jesus, he basically brought a temptation to him. But here in Matthew chapter 4, verse 3, it says specifically, the tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to be turned to bread." This is exactly what the devil does. He plants questions. If you are the Son of God. Now, Jesus Christ knew exactly who he was, but the devil was putting it like, well, prove to me. Many times we get ourselves into problems when we believe that we have to prove to other people what it is we have. I love the phrase that Joyce Myers uses, you really are free when you get to the place where you have nothing to prove and no one to impress. And that's the place where Jesus Christ was. He was basically able to withstand this temptation. It says in Luke chapter 4, verse 1, talking about this same record, it says, Jesus, full of Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the desert, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. Now right there we've got two terms. You know, we saw in Matthew 4:3 he's the tempter. Here again it's telling us that he came as the tempter and tempted him. And also we have the phrase the devil. We'll look at that term, the devil, later. But it does say he ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. I certainly would be. I know you would be too. 40 days, no food, and here he is. And that generally, isn't that mostly when temptation comes though? When you're at, say, physically your weakest, that seems to be the biggest point of struggle. When we're dealing with temptation, I learned years ago that there's an acronym that I like to think of, which has been used in different psychological and counseling settings, and it's called HALT. I've added the S onto it, and I make it HALTS. H-A-L-T-S. Get in touch that temptation most likely comes when you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and stressed. Here's Jesus Christ, certainly lonely at the end of 40 days, or at least the potential for some loneliness. Also, he was tired. There was the hunger that was there. So right there, that's when the tempter comes to him. That's when he'll come to all of us, is when we're at those low points. So get in touch with the things that cause you stress. What are the things that have you anxious? Because that's when you're most likely going to be able to identify this is when the temptation is going to be the strongest. We have to design a plan. I love the teaching that a friend of mine, Josh Anderson, has. In fact, I think there's a YouTube teaching on having a temptation plan and knowing, getting in touch with that. Another thing that we have to realize, a term that we looked at earlier, was the god of this age. Well, as the tempter, the god of this age has manipulated the world around us to get us to think that we need things that the world tells us we need. You know, certainly the advertising out there and everything makes you feel like you need bigger and better and faster and stronger. Things that we begin to work for, we find someday you wake up and you find, I'm really working for things. Well, that's because the tempter, the god of this age, has designed the world to tempt us. There's things that are coming at us visually. You know, the images, sexual images, all the other stuff that happened to us. Also the ears, how he tries to influence us through the things that we say, we hear others say, or what we hear in music. These are many times part of the master scheme as the tempter in which he's trying to influence us. So again, we can know a lot about the nature of the enemy by the way that God describes him. And just look at just that simple phrase, the tempter, and All the things that I've already pointed to. Another thing to get in touch with, which I believe is in Haggai. Haggai talks and he sets up and he defines, how holiness is not infectious. In the Old Testament, in Leviticus, the principle was if this cup was clean and it touched, say, this pen, which was unclean, so this clean object touches this unclean object, does it make this unclean object now clean or sanctified or holy? No, it doesn't. The principle is this unclean, unholy object, when touching this clean object, makes this unholy. Another way I like to think about that is if I have grease and mud all over my hands, I don't care how many clean things I touch, my hands won't be clean. My hands are dirty, they're contaminated. I've just soiled the cup. The world is infected, and the world will infect us. God tells us that we are holy. We have His Holy Spirit. We've got to be aggressive with that in our stance against the world. Because if you're passive, you'll get infected. Another example that you can think about this, which is what I believe God was trying to demonstrate. Holiness is not infectious. Holiness is something you have to work towards. You have to discipline. You have to maintain. The evil uncleanness of the world, that's infectious. If I had tuberculosis, say, and I entered into a room of 1,000 people that were healthy, their healthiness would in no way make me healthy. The fact is, my unhealthiness would have the potential of infecting them. As the tempter, the devil is always working to manipulate the environment around us to get us to become unclean, to get us to become contaminated, to be influenced by the world. We've got to be aggressive. Get in touch with when temptation strikes you, when you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or stressed, and get aggressive in that so that we can stand against him as the tempter. And as Jesus Christ said, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written." He knew the promises of God, he stood on them, and he was able to stand against the tempter.